Welcome back. You're watching Sunday edition here on KTN News. Let's now talk about some realpolitik, what we call it here on Sunday edition. And that is, of course, what has been happening off the campaign trail. And this weekend, it has been a kind of crisscrossing by the two sides of the political divide. President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto taking their hunt for votes to Kakamega, a perceived National Super Alliance stronghold. And on the flip side, the National Super Alliance leaders led by the presidential flag bearer Raila Odinga taking their vote hunt to Meru County and Tharaka Nithi County. They were in Mikinduri, Lari and Maua in the county of Meru. That is yesterday. And on Friday, they were in Tharaka Nithi telling the people there not to elect Jubilee again because they have failed to, according to NASA, to fulfill the promises made to that region. Let's look at both sides and the strategy they are using to try and capture as much of the vote that they did not have in 2013. Let's start with what Jubilee are doing. Dismas, let me start with you again. And they have been trying to make inroads into that Western Kenya voting bloc. NASA on the other side have been trying to consolidate that, telling the Luhya nation that, listen, this time round you have to vote as one. What gives here? Who is making better progress?
Well, there were two interesting observations from the Jubilee venture in Kakamega yesterday that one can easily point out. The first thing the deputy president did before inviting the president to speak, he gave a list of a number of vice chancellors who come from the Luhya community, which in my mind is a violation of Article 10 of our constitution, that any Kenyan is supposed to get a public job, not because he comes from Kakamega or he comes from Nyeri, but because of meritocracy. And I also recall the president saying that if Luhyas vote for him again, then he'll give them more ambassadors, I think in reference to Ambassador Yvonne Kamati, which in my view is unacceptable. People are supposed to be given public positions on merit. And maybe because of the violation of that Article 10 and Chapter 6, that's why the country seems to be in a crisis. That's why we don't have a quality decision-making process at the highest level. And then number two, the deputy president again revisited the issue of the NASA flag bearer. He said that it took them 4 years to decide that it was going to be Raila Odinga. Then now they're going to manage to run the nation, which is a very good propaganda. So for the meeting in Western Kenya, they failed to address the issues affecting voters in Western Kenya. And really that's issues around sugar. But in a very interesting manner, one of the speakers decided to shift responsibility to saying that it's a senior member of the NASA leadership who brought down Mumia's sugar company. And assuming that's the case, that they found Mumia's in a very dilapidated state. What has Jubilee done to resuscitate the Mumia's sugar company? And then, of course, you saw there were some crowds who wanted the two to address the issue of unga. And again, Jubilee decided to tiptoe around the issue. They said they've done their bit. It's only that there's a few traders who decide to play around with the pricing. And in my view, because you're the president and the deputy, you're in charge of the criminal justice system in Kenya, why are you behaving like, again, a member of civil society, claiming that we've brought enough unga, but it's a few traders around here who are playing mischief? Why can't you sort it out? But on the positive side, it was very useful to see that there was actually a crowd which sat there and listened to the messages as they were being delivered. And the campaign seemed to be very solid. When you go to Mount Kenya, I mean the Meru trip, I expected NASA to also come up with very solid messages. But the only thing they were addressing was the issue around Mira. They did not discuss solid issue. But again, it was interesting to find out that people who are seen to be in the NASA zone are actually coming out to receive the two NASA leaders. And one hopes that it's not because simply they wanted to meet with Raila Odinga, but they wanted to listen to him speak.
Alternative.
Yeah. But now, a number of them, Ben, before you cut, a number of them must have gone home yawning because they were not given a very tangible message.
Right.
Like for instance, when he said, I'm going to address the Mira issue, he should have actually told them how he's going to address it. Because even a madman can go to Meru and say, I'm going to address the Mira issue. But he did not give the how. How is he going to address that issue? And I think this is why, even when you talk about President Kenyatta and his campaign and Raila Odinga and his campaign, you do not get to see serious policy interventions. Like right now, when you're in Western Kenya and understand people in this part of the world have ugali, they want to be told that that ugali, which is 90 bob, is actually going to be available in the shops.
Right.
Do not tell us that it's traders who are mismanaging. So we need to put our politicians into the task and tell us, really, they should now go more to content instead of engaging in a lot of drama and a lot of emotion.
All right, Mr. Viketi, Jubilee's attempted inroads in Western Kenya. How do you think that is working out? In Kakamega yesterday, they were saying, Uhuru Kenyatta said that they did not get votes from that part of the country because they did not campaign there. Now that they are campaigning there, do you think there's going to be any change? And in your county, specifically, the county of Trans Nzoia, there seems to be a lot of Jubilee activity there.
One, let me first of all start by addressing the Western trip. You see the president admitting that there was no campaign in Western Kenya. And secondly, is now saying, I heard William Ruto, the deputy president, saying that Vindu Vichenjanga. What he will be addressing, Vindu Vichenjanga in my vernacular, means things can change. The question is, it is changing towards which direction? For us, we've decided to take a solid position towards NASA. Not because of anything else, but you could see the president, what somebody addresses is the gap. When the president comes out and says that, look here, these are the people I've put into my government, it means consciously he's aware that there's a question of inclusivity into his government.
Right.
So that has been one of the highlights from Western region in terms of us feeling that we need to take the opposition wing. Look at the question of UNGA. I've always said in my political campaigns at the grassroots, when you create a policy, it should not be urban. It should go to the grassroots. We should address every Kenyan.
Right.
UNGA Pact is not consumed by about 60% of the people who take ugali. Our people at home go and they actually go to the posho mills. So the priority, if the government wanted to address the majority of Kenyans on the question of UNGA, they should have the first thing taken the maize to the grassroots points, let these people buy the maize, go and so even if they say they're going to avail the packed UNGA, it's going to be for Kakamega town or Bungoma town. The common Mwananchi, Wafula and Wanyonyi inside there will not get it.
All right.
When you go to the question of Mia Sugar, for instance, 5 years down the line, you're saying you're going to give us 500 million. We have a constitution here. Is it allocated? Is it a promise that is going to go through the budget?
All right.
Do you have the government to do it? 5 years, we should have seen more. Of course, there have been attempts. I wouldn't want to behave like a politician who does not want to, look at issues as they are. There has been attempts, but you could see those attempts to me were icing.
Okay.
They were not substantive.
Hold that thought there. Let's try and listen into what transpired in Kakamega at the Bukungu Stadium as the Jubilee team took their campaigns to that part of the country.
President Uhuru Kenyatta and his deputy William Ruto's day-long campaigns in Kakamega County saw them address rallies in Kolomani, Ayega, culminating in a major rally at Buhungu Stadium.
Safari hii tuko hapa tukiwaomba kwa heshima na kwa unyenyekevu kwa sababu sio lazima. Tunaelewana? Sio lazima. Sisi tunauliza kwa heshima na unyenyekevu. Safari hii Ikolomani tutembee pamoja.
Mimi nasikia huko mahali wanamangamanga wamehangaika sana na mimi. Wanasema Uhuru ni mtu mzuri, ule mtu ambaye yuko na maneno ni huyu mwingine huyu. Mimi nataka niwaambie, mimi sio candidate kwa election hii. Kama kwa kweli wanaamini Uhuru ni mtu mzuri, sasa wakubali tupitishe Uhuru tarehe 8 mwezi wa 8, alafu wabaki sasa wakijipanga kulimana na mimi 2022.
In Malinya, maize politics played out with residents lamenting on the scarcity of the subsidized commodity in the market shelves.
Tumeweka bei ya unga shilingi 90. Unaelewana? No, kuna shortage. Sikilizeni mimi bana, sio tubishane. Tunaambiana vile ilivyo. Na bei tumeweka lakini kuna shortage. Hiyo ndio ukweli. Lakini hiyo mahindi ambayo tumeagiza kutoka nje ikifika mahindi itakuwa ya kutosha.
In the recent past, Jubilee has come under heavy criticism from the opposition for doing little to rescue the dwindling fortunes of the sugarcane farmers in the county. But here, Jubilee luminaries sought to deflect the blame back to the opposition, even as President Kenyatta made a pledge of a 500 million shillings kitty to cushion cane farmers against possible market uncertainties this year.
Hii factory ambao wenzetu huko wanapiga kelele kila siku ati sisi ndio tumepandisha bei ya sukari. Nani aliangusha? Ilianguka mbele ya sisi tuingie au ni wale? Si ni wale? Sisi serikali yetu ikakuja, tumeweka tayari shilingi bilioni 3,100, 3.1 billion that we have injected in Mumias factory here. Sasa jamani, kama tulikuwa tunadharauliana vile wanasema, hiyo pesa tungeweka au tungepeleka kwingine?
The Raila Odinga-led opposition outfit has already marked Kakamega as a NASA stronghold, having officially launched their campaigns at this very venue. Narrative which Jubilee leaders sought to discredit.
Kweli leo nimeamini kwamba Hindu lijenjanga.
As recent opposition defectors led by Mumias legislator Benjamin Washali led the onslaught.
Ule ameamua kusupport. Yeye ameamua kusupport. Ukienda kwa billboard hapa anasema ana support. Sisi watu wa Kakamega na watu wa Magharibi tumekataa kusupport a supporter. Ati wewe usupport mtu mwingine na wewe ndio usupport mtu mwingine. Inawezekana kweli?
As the saying here goes, Vindu vichenjanga. Well, Jubilee Brigade will be hoping that come August 8th, things will change in Kakamega County in their favor, an area largely perceived as an opposition stronghold. Jeff Kirui, KTN News from the county of Kakamega.
Jeff Kirui for us there. Hesbon, looking at that crowd there, what is your analysis of it? Is it really Bindubiche and Jang?
The crowd is very impressive, and it's reassuring to Jubilee fanatics, to see that Jubilee can actually go to Western Kenya and have that kind of a crowd, And in terms of what it does to Jubilee, it simply reassures Jubilee fanatics that there is hope, that there is an extent to which we can penetrate Western Kenya. But I think from a communication point of view, I can easily tell that that crowd does not look organic. In a political contest, one thing you want to look at is what are the paraphernalia that the crowd has around them. They seem to be very equipped, and that tells you that maybe there was some curation before they even attended the rally. But that is besides the point. In as much as we need to look at that and put it into perspective, that why is it that everyone is in red, everyone is flying something? Could it be that these are guys who are, just told, there is a rally, there is an incentive to attend the rally? But the critical issue is, once you have that kind of a crowd and you're addressing that kind of a crowd, just like Honorable Buketi and Dismas have pointed out, what exactly is the message you're giving them? And I think to a large extent, I agree with the way President Kenyatta has come down to humbly ask for votes. I would wish that the Jubilee strategists behind his campaign would go ahead and now tell him that if you're asking for votes, don't humble yourself. Humble yourself and anchor yourself on critical issues. It is one thing to tell the people of Western Kenya that we bailed out Mumias with the tunes of 3 billion and all that Mumias was brought down before my government took over. The issue is, when we were giving you the reins of power, we were not giving you to come back and tell us that somebody else messed the system. Right. We're giving you to correct that system. And I think Jubilee needs to start articulating such issues. Instead of blaming people who brought down institutions, they need to tell us the extent to which they've remedied the situation and addressed the issues. But ultimately, I would want to challenge both sides of the political divide, that even as you go to the swing counties, so to speak, because NASA was in Meru, not necessarily because they want to get 50% in Meru, but because they want to make inroads and increase the thresholds.
All right.
And they're not worried about Kakamega. So again, the critical issue is, when you go to Meru or you go to Kakamega or Western Kenya, they seem to forget that sometimes they are speaking to the audience that is at home and not necessarily the audience who is attending the rally. And the audience at home is not as excited as the person who is attending the rally. And the critical thing is that the person who is attending the rally is a voter who cannot be swayed.
Right.
The person who can be swayed is at home. And so when I listen to Vindu Vichenjanga from both sides of the divide, I get confused. What are they changing to? And why should I be concerned that things are changing? Because changing is not good. Changing is only as good as it is making the life of the person who matters sees that change.
All right. Mutinda, finally, on this issue, the president and his entourage were supposed to visit Matungu, Mumias, Butere, and Quisero, and they had to change their tour because of intelligence that there were going to be some hostilities. Do you think Jubilee has done enough in terms of issuing these goodies? They say politics is local. These goodies to Western Kenya, we've heard about 3.1 billion for Mumias, we've heard about Webuye, Pan Paper, we've heard about the goodies that they have, what the Deputy President was talking about. Do you think it's enough to persuade that vote basket in Western Kenya?
Yeah, let me say this before I even get to that. There was something very impressive about both shows in Meru by NASA and in Western by Jubilee. Because if you look at the 2013 results, then these were clearly regions that had taken sides. Western was predominantly CORD then, which is currently NASA, and Meru was predominantly Jubilee. But there were no incidents. Other than just a bit of shouting unga here and there, nothing major that was disruptive. And I think that is commendable going by where we've come from. Because you remember there's a time we were zoning this country, Kanu zones, and you know this is an incumbent regime, that even in Meru there were no incidents. And probably you've said that there was intelligence and that's why they changed route. That already tells you that that was pre-planned. That tells you Kenyans, when they have not been instigated, can listen to anyone and they'll make their decision. I thought that was commendable. About the issue of goodies, whether they're enough or not, really, it's going to be decided.
All right.
But the thing is this, you have to give them something for effort. Because the thing is, they have something to show. Yes. You know, solving a thing and putting effort towards solving a thing. Because this sugar thing has been there for, I think we all know, it's been there. Webuye paper mills, it's been there. It's not like these are new issues. So the only new thing is that we have tried to revive the Webuye paper mills in this way. We've tried to revive Mumias in this particular way. What I think we need to do is that we need to stop making these campaign issues, because honestly they are more of economic issues than political issues. And then we need to get to the bottom of it.
All right.
Why are these things not working out? And what is it that we need to do so that we have a template, so that whoever comes in and is really willing and committed has a clear route map on how to get the alien sugar industry out of the mess, the paper, whether they are viable or not. I think that would be a better approach, because these have now been turned into political issues. And if you look at them, they really touch on the lives of their economic issues. Then I want to say this about Unga, because according to me, as someone who is very sympathetic of Jubilee, the single biggest political issue we have to deal with in this election is that Unga issue. And I'm saying that because it is touching on almost all homesteads in this country. It's a very sensitive issue. Right. I think we need to be more deliberate in how we're handling it. There are reasons that can be given to explain that. And I think we need to do more, to come out more, so that the voters don't think like we are dismissive. Right. Yet I, as a Kenyan, also know that is really a real issue.
All right.
Dismissing it is suicidal.
All right. Dismas, hold that thought. I want us to take a look at what happened in Meru, and then we'll finalize on this issue, and you will. Don't forget that point that you had. Let's take a look what happened in the counties of Tharaka Nithi and Meru as the National Super Alliance leaders, led by Raila Odinga, took their vote hunt to that particular part of the country.
The opposition principals, led by their presidential flag bearer, Raila Odinga, spent their two-day Meet the People tour in the larger Meru region by addressing rallies in Mikindori, Maua, and Lare areas of Meru County.
Naona kila mara Ruto akirukaruka pale atio tutashinda, atio nini, jenasa wanaogopa sisi, hapana. Tukiongea juu ya tume ya uchaguzi na mambo ya ununuzi ya kura, yani kampuni ya kuchapisha kura, sisi tayari tuna ushahidi ya kutosha.
The opposition leaders claimed that they have information that the Jubilee regime wants to use the company to rig the August 8th elections.
Tuko na picha ingine ya hiyo madirectors kule Dubai wakikaribisha Uhuru kwa karamu katika headquarters ya kampuni yao. Kwa hivyo Jubilee wasiseme wanakanusha ati hatujui hawa watu nini. Hapana, wanajaribu kutufanya njama ya kuchapisha kura za ziada ya Jubilee kuiba kura. Tunakataa, sio?
On the agenda for the nation, the principal said that they are ready to ensure that there is free primary and secondary education from September this year and that they will tackle corruption.
Na tutaunganisha Wakenya wote kutoka kila mahali, kutoka Mombasa mpaka Turkana, kutoka Lamu mpaka Malaba. Kila Mkenya atakuwa na haki na uwezo ya kujivunia kuwa Mkenya badala ya kuvumilia kuwa Mkenya.
Uhuru na Ruto ndio wameleta hii njaa maksudi ili watu waweze kufaidika, ili watu waweze kupata pesa, wafanye biashara kubwa na nyinyi. Ndio sababu mnajanganywa ati kuna unga ya shilingi 90. Hiyo shilingi 90 mmeona hiyo unga?
The opposition has been making inroads in both Meru and Tharaka Nithi counties, which are perceived to be Jubilee strongholds, in anticipation of getting more votes than what they got in 2013.
Hatuwezi kuwa na nchi yenye wachache wanasema wanakula nyama na wengine wanameza mate. Tarehe 8 mwezi wa 8 mwaka huu, hata hiyo nyama tutawanyang'anya tupatie wananchi.
However, in today's tour, the other NASA principals, Kalonzo Musyoka, who is Raila's running mate, Musalia Mudavadi and Isaac Ruto, were missing in action. As the NASA Brigade continues with their countrywide campaigns, they are expected to launch their manifesto on Monday. Chris Dairo, KTN News in Maua, Meru County.
So, Raila Odinga and his NASA team entourage in the other parts of the country, in Tharaka Nithi and Meru counties. You had something to say, Dismas. Then you can tell us about what you think about NASA's messaging in this particular vote hunt.
Yeah, I wanted to discuss the Western Province, yes. And I want to pick from where Kavemba has left. That this is an economics issue which must not be mixed with politics. But you know, we elect politicians to take economic decisions. So when you're talking about the sugar industry in Western Kenya, whether it's active, whether it's collapsed, you expect politicians to take those decisions. And that's not a matter that you can say it's not supposed to be introduced in this campaign, because you're talking about sources of incomes for so many farmers. And the same is the case for the pan paper. Because you understand pan paper was sold to a private investor at a cost which makes people nervous. That this person who bought the pan paper mills bought it at about 10% of the entire cost. So you wonder, when the decision was being made that we are going to revive pan paper, whose interest were we serving? Were we serving the interests of the locals or of this particular investor? And when you look at that crowd, as has been indicated, there was very good mobilization because most people are in the Jubilee colors. And that now takes us to Meru. Part of the crowd in Meru which came to see Raila Odinga was also Jubilee branded. So now you begin to wonder, were they passing a very subtle message, or did they come with the Jubilee branding because they wanted to tell Raila Odinga that you are addressing us, but we are still in Jubilee.
Right.
But you saw there was a bit of emotion. And another thing that Major General Kaiseri needs to address is that where NASA was supposed to have their meeting, there was a bit of vandalism by state officers, and NASA has accused the Kenya police of sending some of their own to go and vandalize that. Maybe that's something that Major General Kaiseri is supposed to address with speed.
All right.
So as to ensure that in future we don't have such incidences of people going around and mutilating branding for other political parties.
Right.
But now the most important message for NASA is when you saw Professor Kindiki, and I understand there's a relationship with the Senate Majority Leader, now saying that as far as they're concerned, in that part of the world, they're no longer going to be identified with Mount Kenya. They're going to be Upper Eastern, and they've got their own specific issues they want sorted out. And it would be interesting to find out how Jubilee is going to sort out those issues before the elections.
All right. Very quickly, what is your verdict of the Jubilee, of the NASA, of your messaging?
I like one thing that the NASA Brigade did in Meru. Mm-hmm. If you look at the messaging that Raila did, he took an onslaught on Jubilee. One is telling Ruto anarukaruka. And he's saying that in a perceived Jubilee stronghold. He's saying that hao watu wanataka kuiba kura. Then Wetangula is saying wanakula nyama. And when they ask the crowd to respond, we get positive vibe from the ground. That was very delicate game by NASA. But the fact that they got positive vibe from the crowd, it tells you that this is an area that is willing to listen to alternative views. That is one thing that I carefully looked into, because in such areas, you saw Uhuru when he was in Western, he was literally begging them to listen. But Raila is taking a very strong statesman position and addressing an issue that is eating into the Jubilee, Jubilee's issues, right, without compromising. And he's not afraid that he's in a Jubilee perceived stronghold. That is something that you carefully need to look at, and it tells you that Meru is ready, and I won't be surprised if Meru will go 50-50 or 60-40 this time round.
Hesbon, do you think NASA is going to get anything from Meru, and if anything, 50-50, 60-40?
I think they'll get a big chunk of the Meru votes. It won't get anywhere near 50. And you know, going by what we see in the crowd that you know, welcomed Raila and his team, you'd appreciate the fact that you know, just like Dismas said, they went in colors that, you know, gets you off guard. You are thinking, are they Jubilee guys who all of a sudden decided, let us listen to Raila? And to what extent then did Raila give them a message that would make them change their mind? Mm-hmm. And I think I like what Honorable Buketi has said, you know, and I like the straight hitting Raila Odinga, you know, and the uncompromising, you know, Moses Wetangula, because they speak issues and they are not afraid. You know, we didn't see the crowd boo them, which is a big plus for NASA. But again, I would want to say that, you know, for Raila and the other principals in NASA, mm-hmm, it is good to give reasons why the Jubilee government should be brought down. But it is also important that they remember that they need to articulate issues that after bringing this government down, this is how we are going to do things in this country. And this is how it's going to make sense to the common mwananchi. And to that extent, I would say that I'm still of the opinion that NASA should, as much as possible, try and refresh their campaign, you know, so that when we have the principals talk about issues directly, we should have refreshing voices, progressive minds, you know, the likes of Ken Okoth, the likes of Mutula Kilonzo Jr., the likes of Hassan Omar. You know, we should have these guys now articulate issues that in Raila's government, and they should not speak about NASA. They should now speak about in Raila's government, this is how we are going to address the issue of rent, so that we have 1, 2, 3 clear-cut messages on how they're going to address issues. In Raila's government, this is how we are going to address the issue of unga. Right. Because rather than hit the government that unga has turned us into scavengers, everyone has to wake up early to go to the shop and look for unga, they should be telling us what are they going to do. And I think once they launch their manifesto, my understanding is that they will now have individuals who are very refreshing and progressive articulate those issues.
Mutinda, finally, what does Jubilee have to do to make sure they salvage Meru? Or do you need to salvage? Do you need to salvage?
You see, Meru is a region that amongst the regions of Mount Kenya that is known to be a bit liberal. If you look at how they voted last time, I've told you that the presidential, they were predominantly Jubilee, but they voted for Mbas, they voted for TNA, and incidentally, they had 2 ODM MPs in Igembe Central and in Tigania Mpuri. That is unlike any other region, any other place in Mount Kenya. In Mount Kenya, there is the Kuria factor in Migori, you know that. So in Meru, it is entirely them, but they have some voting patterns that show you that sometimes they are not as emotive as you'd. It's not easy to just whip them. They have other things they consider, because how do you explain them yet giving 2 ODM MPs? But at the presidential level, even in those constituencies, it was clearly Jubilee, but they elected 2 ODM MPs in their region. So that tells you that, and probably it also explains the way they were also receptive and they listened. And I have to say that there was the reception and the attendance was a bit worrying, only that it doesn't qualify anyone to use the word salvage because that's our region. But there is need to do something so that probably, see, the question is, why did NASA think that is soft swing vote? That is the question here. And I think that should come to the mirror issue, because you see, it is about economics. And those people have been hurt by, you know, the issue bans that UK has put in place, and they have a feeling that probably the government has not been doing enough to help them out. I think that also can explain why there was that willingness to receive them, probably also as a signal to the government that don't take us for granted, address our issues, or we can also go the other way.
All right. So let's switch gears very swiftly and talk about, for the next 20 minutes or so, talk about something that you mentioned, Hezbollah, and that is the party manifestos. And it is a season of promises, as we have seen. And this week, particularly tomorrow on Monday, the opposition flag bearer Raila Odinga is set to unveil the NASA manifesto. And on Wednesday, the 21st day of June, President Uhuru Kenyatta will be unveiling the Jubilee manifestos. And there is a summary of what Jubilee promises are and what the NASA promises are. As we have seen over the last few weeks, Jubilee has been promising increased social protection, including more money for the elderly, free secondary education beginning January 2018, expansion of infrastructure, extension of the SGR is an example, line into Naivasha and to Western Kenya, increased spending on security. And since the party is seeking a second time, its manifesto is also likely to be a continuation of the pledges made in 2013. We'll talk about that. NASA promises counties to get 45% of the national budget. They empower farmers by providing water for irrigation, higher pay for teachers, and free education. University students to get higher loans. An all-inclusive government to unite Kenyans into one family. Increased salaries for doctors and enough drugs in public schools. This month. What is this? What do you expect from the manifestos? And does this mirror the reality on the ground? And when you listen to the messages by the two sides, the two main protagonists, does this mirror what's happening? And does this mirror what Kenyans are feeling on the ground?
Well, unfortunately in Kenya, these manifestos count for absolutely nothing. Because what you are going to see Jubilee unveil on Wednesday and NASA tomorrow, the original author of all these manifestos is Professor Nyang' Nyong'o and James Orengo. They're the ones who came up with the original manifesto, which later on they transformed into Vision 2030. So one would expect that whatever is coming out tomorrow and on Wednesday is going to be along the lines of Vision 2030. Because as a nation, we're not going to be reviewing our development priorities every 5 years. At a global level, we need to have a global understanding or an helicopter view where Kenya wants to go. Because we can't, assuming that Nick and company take over August 9th, and then they start implementing projects for 5 years, and then 2022 another government takes over. Are we going to be having breaks every 5 years? In mature economies or mature democracies, we have a global picture, and which is implemented throughout. It doesn't matter who is in government. And one would expect that all these people are going to stick with Vision 2030. And for Jubilee is in a very dangerous spot. And what one would expect during the presentation on Wednesday is to tell us, this is what we promised 4.5 years ago when we take office, this is what we've delivered, and this is the variance, and this is the reason as to why there's this big variation, so that Kenyans can identify with the development agenda. In fact, if in the Jubilee team, I'll take a typical household in Kenya, maybe a middle-class household, say in Nyalenda or Kibera or Kileleshwa, and see whether they're better off 4.5 years later. And then for NASA, they need also to tell us that since this is the track record for Jubilee, these are we intend to change our agenda. Because if you're going to promise us that you're going to do roads, for instance, Jubilee told us they're going to come up with, I think, 5 global stadiums. I've not seen them anywhere. They promised us food security. You can't find unga anywhere. They promised us a laptop. So even what they're going to be telling Kenyans on Wednesday, that this is what we are going to deliver, most Kenyans will be suppressing a yawn. That's a good recipe for you to yawn when they give you the promises. And also for NASA, they need to tell us, we'll be able to deliver better than Jubilee, and this is our strategy. But outside that, those will just largely be media events.
Mr. Biketi, the promises that are going to be made, what is NASA going to do to persuade Kenyans that these are not just empty promises, not just empty talk, and you're actually going to implement this if elected into government? What is different?
Number one, first of all, we can see we need to appreciate one thing. I'd like to join my Jubilee colleague who has said that we are happy as Kenyans that we are seeing the election is narrowing down to the debate of issues. If Dismas can remember that this is what Jubilee promised and they have not delivered, then it means that we are making progress in the politics of this country. We need to see more of these manifestos narrowing down so that we can hold whatever government that is going to be in place accountable to what they told us. As I said, we are in an Article 1 situation for the next 50 days to see who do we sign our contract with. Now, these are the terms of contract that we are getting, that they're displaying before us. As NASA, we have the advantage of the fact that our Jubilee counterparts made certain promises for 5 years. They have not delivered. I don't have to line them down as Dismas has already done. The economy is in bad shape. We all know the Constitution is very clear when you are getting into public debt. It should be equitable between the current generation and the future generation. What NASA is coming in to do is to first of all say, look here, these guys have not done it. And how it should be done is we need, number one, we need a government that involves everybody. Kalonzo has been very specific, and I like what NASA has done to have the collegiate presidency with 5, it's a menu. I mean, it's what do you call it, a buffet. Because all the 5 presidents have stood for certain principles. Now, all these principles are being put into one pillar and are now telling Kenyans that, one, me as Kalonzo have always stood for servant leadership. And this is what we want to see. We don't want rulers, we want servant leadership. When you talk about free primary education, you've seen the challenges that Jubilee has gone through. As we are saying, from free primary education to the university, if taxes are well collected, if they're well managed, this can be done. I mean, it's an array of issues that would have gone down to, but what is critical is whichever side of the divide is Kenyans now need to ask themselves, who do we need to vote for, not because of ethnic inclination. My worry still is, as we are talking about Meru, Mount Kenya region, Rift Valley, and if you look at and that's a worry I still have, if you look at, we've been discussing the regional travels. Right. I could still see that certain regions have certain inclination towards certain political divides without really unearthing the manifestos. So my worry is, are we going to get into the situation of, if Uhuru has said it, so be it, or are we going to unpack?
And listen to what they have to say.
Yes, are we going to unpack
Jubilee
the issues?
have accused you of stealing some of their agendas, like free secondary education, saying you just stole that from them.
What you're forgetting is that Jubilee was not absolutely responsible for Vision 2030. Some of these things are within the parameters, the 4 parameters of the Vision 2030.
Right.
And for us, where we are coming from, we are saying, you have not been able to implement it as we had envisioned it to be implemented. And we are saying, look here, they're dense here, and this is what we're going to do to absolutely get the vision right of what needs to be done.
All right.
So you cannot be a monopolist of what Kenyans want to achieve. I mean, it will be very difficult, actually, Ben, to absolutely jump out and come up with fresh ideas that are not within the aspirations of Kenyans.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Hesbon, looking at these sets of, just a summary of what we expect from the manifestos of the 2 main protagonists, from a political communication point of view, which side is getting it right?
I think on paper, if you look at what they've articulated, you'd actually say that, NASA sits strongly on the issue of devolving at least 45% of national resources to the county levels. And I think Bomet Governor Isaac Ruto has been buttressing that everywhere he goes. And it's a significant thing if it is unpacked or unbundled in a way that the common Mwananchi would understand. So you can't really tell that this side is going to get it or this side is not going to get it unless you see how they unbundle it and then make it resonate with the common Mwananchi. But I think coming back to Jubilee, they also sit strongly if they package their message in such a way that they just forget about the failures, because people will remember the failures. So they don't need to remind people of what they've not done. I mean, from where I see it,
so they don't need to address them.
They don't need. They need to address. The only thing is they don't need to remind people that we promised this, we didn't deliver to this extent, we failed here. What they need to do is to capitalize on everything that they've done. For instance, the SGR is a good thing to everyone. The SGR is a good thing, and we need to understand it for what it is, because it's a major infrastructural development. So the corruption issues surrounding the SGR are besides the point. The fact that it was completed early is even better. Now, the fact that it is opening up Kenya and will have goods transported to the up-country section of the country is good. What Jubilee needs to move ahead and talk about is, how is it going to help up-country people? How are they going to use the SGR as an outro point? To what extent is it going to help Kenyans export? And if you look at just one instance, you look at the EPZ, for instance, it's our major export outlet in this country. But unfortunately, we are importing the fabric that is basically the raw material for what we are exporting. So Jubilee needs to move to conversations such as, we are going to empower farmers, we are going to introduce cotton farming, so much so that the SGR does not bring in this fabric from China, but taps on the fabric that is grown within Kenya to bring in more revenue as an export, outlet. Right. So to that extent, I think whoever is going to win this war, because the manifestos are probably drawn from the same thing, is the person who's going to unbundle their manifesto in such a way that resonates with the common mwananchi and tells them that if you vote Jubilee, this is how life is going to be for you. If you vote NASA, this is how life is going to be for you. And if it is good life, then they will win it.
Utinda, how do you look forward to these manifestos? What do you expect?
Now, I first want to agree with my fellow panelists, the one who's vied, about this issue of, accusations that you have stolen what was ours. And I want to put it this way. Vision 2030, Dismas was also right about that, because now we are very clear about where we're going. And then I say that, you see, politics of this country first focused on the political pillar. So we fought for independence, and all our heroes were those who fought for independence. After that, we fought for dictatorship, against dictatorship, and everybody who made it and who had a big name politically was those who really rose up to fight for opening up of the democratic space. And that really took most of our history as an independent country. And that's how we used to rate leaders. Those who were out there questioning the wrongs that were happening were the ones who were looked up as the main people. That went on up to multi-party and probably up to when Kibaki came into power. Let me say that, because Kibaki is the one who really even created a conducive environment for the passing of the 2010 Constitution, when the one we call the second liberation. All that focused on the political pillar. So if you look at comparatively in the region, Kenya happens to be ahead in terms of governance and democratic practice because of that. Then during Kibaki's time, Vision 2030 shifted the focus.
Right.
So now we developed the economic pillar. And Kibaki did well. The first government, the Grand Coalition government, did well. This government has also picked up on that, and that's where the SGR and the major infrastructural projects are coming up. So what remains and what has not really been addressed over time is the social pillar. That is where education comes in. That is where the issue of food security comes in. That is where the issue of health comes in, and that is why it is inevitable that these manifestos have to look similar, because the pertinent issues facing Kenyans, sorry for that, pertinent issues facing Kenyans currently have much to do with the social pillar than any other pillar. That's why you see Jubilee talking about the issue of transfers. That's again the social pillar, addressing now, having programs that are going to touch on people. There has been the issue of resources, the economic pillar. We already need to understand that the framework under devolution has already provided that we are going to be sharing resources between the national government and the county governments. What NASA is trying to do is to address the ratios. Although the Constitution has already done that, they are saying, as a policy of government, they'll improve it. So what we need to focus on as Kenyans to ensure that this framework works for us is to ensure that we have the right leaders, so that once these resources come to the 47 units, then they do that which is envisaged in Vision 2030 to ensure that we have an equitable sense of growth in all corners of the country. Because that's
how does Jubilee balance what was promised in 2013 and was not delivered? And lay Kenyan will ask, where are the 5 stadia? Where is one stadium?
Yeah, I think there is a challenge there, but unlike him, who wants us not to face those issues candidly, and yet we know they are being used against us. They are decampaigning us. The NASA is using laptops, it's using the stadiums. So I think we need to have a narrative that is convincing us to what were the challenges that made us not really achieve that, and what are the plans once we get this second mandate on the 8th to ensure that these things that were promised and were not done are done. I think we need an honest conversation instead of burying our heads in the sand, because if we do, those issues are going to be used to effectively decampaign against us, and they are going to hurt us probably more than we would expect.
Ben, you know, it's assumed that all human beings are rational and they work for their selfish interest. And that will be Jubilee's biggest challenge. That this is what you promised us 5 years ago. You've not been able to deliver up to 90%. Why would we trust you with another 5 years for delivery? Because you see, there are some issues today which are very urgent. Like, for instance, the issues in Western Kenya. Nick says tribesmen do not need unga. They want the mind in a gorogoro. So if for the last 5 years we've not had the mind in a gorogoro, how do you trust Jubilee that now, in the next 5 years, they're going to sort it out? If there's a middle-class person, say, in Kileleshwa struggling with a mortgage for the last 5 years because of lack of opportunities, right, how do you convince that person that in the next 5 years you'll be able to sort it out? I think those will be the challenges. And then for NASA, it's also for them to convince that they can actually deliver where Jubilee has failed to do so. And I'm hoping that at the end of the day, in as much as we've got so many presidential candidates, that people do not start imagining that the election on August 8th, it's about Raila Odinga and President Kenyatta. Right. In my view, this election is not about Raila Odinga. It's not about President Kenyatta. It's about your individual person. What are your selfish interests as a human being? Because at the beginning of the year, you come up with your wishes for the beginning of the year. Who among Raila Odinga and President Kenyatta would assist you achieve those objectives? If, say, you want to put up a property in Muthaiga, who among those two will create the environment for you to achieve that objective? Right. If you are a pensioner today and you're worried about the state of healthcare in Kenya, who among those two will create opportunities for you as a pensioner not to struggle with your medical bills? I think at the end of the day, that's what we need to look at.
All right, good point.
And maybe something that you allow me to point out yesterday, for the first time since the campaigns began, President Kenyatta was in a very good mood in Western Kenya. He was even cracking jokes. I don't know whether he had a good cup of coffee in the morning or now the Jubilee strategist found the Midas touch. But I found that one to be very interesting. He seemed to be in cloud 9.
All right. Thank you. Those are your closing remarks. Your closing remarks in 30 seconds. You want to say something about this first promise by Jubilee?
The promises by Jubilee suffer from one major issue: the infrastructure to deliver them. Because the 5 years they've suffered from corruption. Every issue on a manifesto involves resources. Right. So when you look at the personalities, the infrastructure to ensure that these things actually happen is the major dent that Jubilee has. Why I pointed to you that issue: wherever I go in my area, I don't know if it's happening in other areas that are not Jubilee strongholds, or it's because this is a NASA area. Right. The issue of transfers to the elderly, the 65 years and above. Every village I've gone to in my area, they are saying they don't get that money. Okay. The orphan children. So I want to believe there's an infrastructure issue that if Jubilee does not tell us how they are going to do this, I will doubt them from the word go.
All right. Thank you for those. Your final remarks, 30 seconds only.
I think I'll stick to my advice to Jubilee that they don't have to resurrect the things that they didn't do and they promised, because they risk having all the other players in this election who are anti-Jubilee framing those issues and making them a political agenda. So to the extent that they've delivered something, they need to focus on what they've delivered and how they're going to deliver more. For CORD, I think I've made it clear that they did now to address the reason why we should vote for CORD. And it should not necessarily come from the principles. I think we need a progressive mindset and faces that can unite Kenyans from across the board.
All right. Final thoughts, very quickly.
As Jubilee, as the incumbents, there is a challenge, of course, because of the issues being, but we also have an upper hand in that we've done things that had not been done. And I want to agree with him that we really need to ride on that because it's the best way out, but also not to bury our heads in the sand when those we've not done are brought out. I think we need to have an honest narrative about why they've not been done. Right. And finally, we need to explain this issue of food shortage. Because like I said, that is the most pertinent issue in this election, and it is really going to determine a lot whether we are going to get re-elected or not. So we need to really pay the attention that it deserves.
Thank you, Mutinda. Thank you so much. Of course, we shall continue to keep an eye on this issue, the manifestos as they are being launched this week for you in the way only we can. Will they be starkly different? Will they mirror each other? We'll take a look at that. We have talked about an array of issues for the last 2 hours. A lot of feedback from on these issues. Very quickly to some of this. And Rev Mwa on Twitter says NASA has an agenda, but they fail miserably on their communication skills. Bwire says in Western, people attended Jubilee rallies because waliambiwa Uhuru amebeba pesa. But kura bado ni NASA. Abdallah Nasa says, it's called Abdallah Sasa, Chiloba worked with UNDP and knows for that credibility is key. You can lose your job for it. So what happened? Minor United on Twitter asks Dismas Mukua. Jubilee responds not in defense of IEBC, but because it was accused of improper contact with Al Ghurair. And American says, classic example of Samsonian complex. I lose, we all lose. What was Raila discussing with Pearl Media? And finally, one here from Vico Dhizu says, previously they have been given space. What did they do? Bangol elections. That is what he thinks of NASA. And finally, one here who says, one here from Michael, from Ryan Musilu says, the parliament will be remembered partially on good legislation, but 60% show of childishness, barbaric. That is his verdict of the 11th Parliament. Many thanks for joining us on Sunday edition. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us. Dismas Mukua, political risk analyst, and Nick Biketi, and a political aspirant for Kwanza parliamentary seat on an ANC ticket. All the best in that. And of course, Hezbon Owila, political analyst here on Sunday edition, and Jubilee strategist Mutinda Kavemba. As we leave it on the broadcast, be sure to join us every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. to 12 noon as we dissect the biggest political issues in this country in the way only we can. I'm Ben Kitili.